Buena gente, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos al segundo episodio de esta sección de estos niveles perdidos de The Last of Us, que como ya saben, bueno, son niveles que no se incluyeron en el juego final, son, como ya sabemos, niveles que están en estado pre-alfa, por tanto no están acabados, ya jugamos este, ya está en el canal, Fiesta de Jackson. Vamos a por el segundo, las Alcantarillas de Seattle, así que venga, no me extiendo más y vamos a por ello. ¡Vamos para allá!
In this second deleted level, which is an extended sequence of the sewers in Seattle, this comes on the heels of where Ellie goes into a building and she survives an attack by stalkers and gets thrown out of a window and gets swept away by the current. And then we cut this section that used to be there in the final game. Now you will get to play it. So this was a way to get a bit more interesting puzzles, interesting traversal, figure out how Ellie can navigate the sewers with the fighting current. Ultimately, with a lot of these levels and these sequences, the reason why we cut them were for pacing purposes. But here it is for you in this very kind of raw form that part of it will feel finished, parts of it will feel like assets are missing as far as audio, animation won't be final. But it's a glimpse into what a game looks like when it's months away from finishing. Enjoy.
Le tenemos que dar incluso, Cuidado. Qué bueno. Vamos a disfrutar, como dice Neil Druckmann. Esto, gente, esto sí está en el juego final, como bien dijo Neil. Esto sí está en el juego final. El tema de la dirección del mando y todo, qué cosa. Esto ya no estaba. Esto ya, gente, no. Esto ya no existe en parte 2, Esto ya no existe en parte 2 ya,
Vale.
Mira, no me pude agarrar ahí por aquí. Aquí. Bien. Venga, vamos parte por parte para ir viendo todito. Claro, pero creo que esa es la parte... Voy a ir por aquel lado porque creo que esta es la parte como final. Vamos por aquí. Creo porque al estar la escalera ahí, claro, tenemos que ir por ahí. Creo que esa es la parte final. Vamos a ir parte por parte aquí. Venga.
This level, internally known as
no, este es el 2.
was quite long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle.
Espera un momento,
The sewer section was
Ahora,
originally long
este es el 2.
game with approximately 10 minutes more.
Yes.
This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of
Sinceramente
the
no tengo ni
traversal
idea.
puzzle.
Vamos a ver
Players
si
that
este es
go
el primero.
upstream to use the current to get when players reach the doorway
Nope,
and enter into the room, they're faced with a dead end. The real reason for this dead end room is that on the reversal, when exiting back out of the doorway, players are faced with the route onwards. A pipe that they'd not been able to see when they were swept past it on the way in, and something that was hidden from view when on the side platforms. The intention here being that the only option is to go off the standard path in order to search for a way out.
Ahí arriba no hay. Tiene que ser ahí. Ese tiene que ser. Vale, ese tiene que ser el 1. Bueno, espérate, porque no tengo ni idea.
Throughout the rest of the level, we also
El
used
cuadro,
light to indicate to the
el
player that they
5.
were heading. We slowly introduced the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes
Hostia,
and
igual es el
crouching in these
primero,
tight
¿eh?
spaces. This
La
is to
verdad no
slowly
tengo ni idea.
build up
Espera.
to and encourage
Espera,
the player to
porque me
climb
estoy
into
viendo
such
una
small
liada
pipes
gorda
that
aquí,
they'd have to be
guapa.
crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take. The ladder acts as an immediate goal for the player,
mira, este es el
but
primero,
being able to climb out is not going to be so easy. To keep levels interesting and engaging, we alternate between positive and negative values the player experiences. Here, it's a positive to have found a ladder, but then a negative to discover it's not the solution. But then another positive to identify the next short-term goal of the doorway. By alternating between these opposing values, we give players what they expect, but not how they expect it.
Es para ir por partes, para no... Vale, la 2 era esa de allá. Así que vamos a por ella. Por pasto. Vamos a por esto. Para ir viendo parte por parte, porque me gusta más, ¿vale?
This level, internally known as Fine Nora, was quite long in duration as we had to make Ellie traverse a far distance to the opposite side of downtown Seattle. The sewer section was originally longer than what we released the game with, approximately 10 minutes more. This was one of the few areas of the game that used water flow as part of a traversal puzzle. The player has to go upstream to use the current to get to the platform to reach the other side. We mostly cut this mechanic game-wide, however it remained in essence in the section swimming to the aquarium as Ellie when you were avoiding the waves.
Ok, vale. Me parece, todo esto me parece súper interesante. Pero súper interesante. Sería el 3.
When players reach the doorway and enter into the room, they are faced with a dead end. The real reason for this dead end room is that on the reversal when exiting back out of the doorway, players are faced with the route onwards. A pipe that they'd not been able to see when they were swept past it on the way in, and something that was hidden from view when on the side platforms. The intention here being that the only option is to go off the standard path in order to search for a way out.
Que es ese de ahí, efectivamente. Es que es un muy buen recurso, porque es donde estábamos aquí, y obviamente cuando tú ya sales, pues coges y te encuentras eso y dices, oye, pues por ahí es por donde tenemos que ir, efectivamente. Qué bueno, muy buen recurso ese.
Throughout the rest of the level, we also use light to indicate to the player that they were heading in the right direction. At each turn, however, we block the direct route forward. Players would know that they just have to keep finding alternative paths, promoting those feelings of being desperate and trapped.
Muy bueno. Bien. Es que me gusta eso, tío, me gusta eso.
We slowly introduce the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to, and encourage, the player to climb into such a small pipe that they'd have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take.
Vale, muy bien. Es que, joder.
We slowly introduce the player to consider climbing into smaller pipes and crouching in these tight spaces. This is to slowly build up to and encourage the player to climb into such a small pipe that they'd have to be crawling on their stomach, which is something that the player previously may not have recognised as a playable space, let alone the desired route they need to take. We added a tiny space just to reward the player's exploration with a pick-up item, and we made sure it was something that made sense that you'd find in this area. A canister and all the garbage that had been washed into the sewers from the surface.
Claro. Qué bueno. Me gusta, esto me gusta porque son cositas que al final las mecánicas del juego te dejan hacer, ¿no? Está súper guay, tío.
We love the idea of making Ellie prone through a tiny dirty pipe in order to get out, as it was a great opportunity to use our prone mechanic. The unique camera setup was created to support crawling in these pipes, as the standard prone camera is much higher above the player. We also created custom collision in order for Ellie to manoeuvre in these tight spaces easily. Initially, the oblong collision capsule around her character caused issues crawling around corners. We put extra effort into the custom corner collision, so the movement experience is as smooth as the main game.
Wow. Gente, aquí ven la barbaridad del trabajo que tiene el juego, tío. Es una cosa de locos y la cantidad de cosas que descartan al final, ¿eh? No nos olvidemos que es un juego de 20 horas, tío. De Last of Us parte 2. Y demás, y mucho más, obviamente, también por el hecho de que si coges todo coleccionables y tal, que vamos, una cosa de loco, es enorme.
In order for the player to feel cramped, claustrophobic and desperate, we'd been enforcing the traversal mechanics that allow for a tight environment which promote these feelings. We introduced the use of the squeeze through so that we can keep the player feeling enclosed and tight, but without repeating the same geometry. Here we change from low ceilings with wider walls to high ceilings and tight walls to change up the spatial pacing and keep the level from repeating itself.
Qué bueno, tío. Me encantan estas cosas, tío. Es que de verdad que me encantan estas cosas, tío. pero encantarme.
Que te joda el universo.
Es lo típico, aquí que te salga ahora un clicker o algo, claro, te cagas por las patas para abajo, te cagas.
Menudo sitio de mierda para morir.
Vamos y te cagas, tío. Aquí hay otro de estos.
Originally, we had the water line much higher here, so players had to swim through this tight tunnel. However, from watching user test feedback, it was occasionally causing people to discount the route entirely and turn back on themselves. So to avoid any risk of this happening in the final game, we present a lower water level so the tunnel is easy to see and commit to using. Although this isn't as impactful without the prone swim, it's the better decision as it means a smoother experience for the player with no backtracking frustration.
Está súper bien hecho esto, tío. Me encantan cómo
As we surface from the water and over the crest of the slope, we reveal what is further in this tunnel. A clicker that has sprouted and the fungus has grown on the sides of the pipe.
Ahí está.
It was great to see people who user tested this area becoming increasingly worried as we forced the player to squeeze past the fungus and inches away from the clicker's face, all the time not being sure whether the clicker might be alive or attack them. Although we aren't as cruel as to force a clicker attack in such close proximity, we do have a payoff for this moment. This clicker momentarily turned into Joel to show Ellie's PTSD from what happened to Joel at the start of the game.
¡Hostia, qué bueno!
Ultimately, we decided to save this moment for the farm level, as it was more impactful there because it could become the centerpiece of that experience. Whereas in the sewers, we weren't able to make it as much of a narrative point and give it the breathing room and reaction time that it deserves, given the tight space.
Qué bueno. Sí, lo que pasa en la granja cuando le da el ataque a Ellie, cuando está con JJ en el granero. Es verdad. Y aquí como está como muy un poco con al estar todo estrecho con mucha ansiedad, pues se le genera eso. Miren esto, tío, miren. Mírenlo ahí. Mírenlo ahí. Ya, qué asco, tío. Y ahora es cuando ¡ah! Qué bueno eso, Qué bueno eso, Qué bueno me pareció eso, tío. Miren como que él quiere enseguida salir de ahí. Qué pasada, macho. Joder. Qué cosa, Vamos. Para allá, gente. Vale, tenemos uno de estos ahí. Vamos allá. De aquí,
For the final section, we eventually opened you out into a wider area as you traverse through such tight spaces leading up to this. So changing the environmental pacing makes it begin to feel like we're coming to the end of Ellie's ordeal. An earlier iteration used the current that we'd shown at the start for a slightly tougher traversal puzzle to conclude the sewers. The ladder was clearly visible from most of the area, but the player was faced with a fast-flowing torrent of water they couldn't cross. If the player attempted to jump into the water, they were not able to swim across the ladder due to the water's speed. But instead, they had to traverse the pipe running along the top of the space in order to get across the water.
Va a ser buenísimo esta idea por el hecho ese que al final te va indicando que vas a llegar al momento final de como dice él, del calvario de Ellie, porque es así. Aquí había un clicker, tío. Se venía para nosotros. No lo vi. No me acordaba yo, porque estos sí salen en el juego. Obvio, ¿no?
Muy bien.
Qué bueno, tío. El tema de eso, del calvario de Ellie y tal, es
we get
buenísimo.
to see stalkers that are embedded into the walls. So this optional room is a nice little early extra that the player gets if they explore. We also use the pickups to lure players over to be close enough to trigger the stalker's attack. And this caused quite a few jump scares with user testers who played our game before its release.
Qué bueno, tío. Ahora podemos abrir aquí porque esto sí es el final del juego. Vamos 13-16, ahora tenemos que ir por la zona aquella de allá. Por aquí, efectivamente. Y mira, ahí.
Using this pipe was retained in the iteration we shipped with, as it's the last of the extreme methods Ellie has to undergo in order to escape the sewers. and what she will go through in her pursuit of revenge.
Es que me parece buenísimo, tío. Me parece buenísimo estas cosas, tío. Porque te indican lo que querían hacer y cosas que obviamente de niveles que descartaron al final no lo descartaron completamente, sino alguna parte del nivel fue la que realmente pues ellos pues decidieron pues acabar con él, ¿no? Pero pues, qué bueno, tío.
The last ladder climb is quite lengthy, and although we could have trimmed it down to a shorter climb, we liked how this last segment of the journey built anticipation for whether there was success at the top or not after all you've been through. Ultimately, the ladder exits out into the subway station, which is how it connects in the final game. Ellie then has to find her way to the hospital from here, crossing paths with the scars for the first time.
En el parque acá, sí señor. Sí señor. Qué bueno está, qué guapo está lo de los niveles perdidos estos, tío. Qué bueno, tío. Esto es más director que otra cosa, sinceramente. Estás arriba, él. algo, tío. Pues ahí lo tienen, gente, ahí lo tienen. Qué bueno, la parte final, qué bien, qué bien. Me ha gustado bastante también de las alcantarillas de Cetril. Nos queda solo el de la cacería, así que ya en el próximo vídeo pues tendrán ese. Un placer y de verdad, encantado de vivir por primera vez porque es la primera vez que lo estoy jugando estos niveles perdidos. Hasta la próxima.